Following the previous part, Southern Edge's spirits had never been higher. Despite their enthusiasm, they were all taken aback upon arrival. But it also surprises me no less when I see viewers who watch the video without subscribing, so please subscribe to support me. Thank you very much. The once old and dilapidated gate of Mount Hua had been replaced with a magnificent one, painted in red and gold. Elder Sima Sung reassured his disciples that this was merely an external show. No matter how much they changed, their beggar nature would remain the same. At that moment, Elder Hein Sang opened the door to welcome Southern Edge with great confidence, exuding the attitude that wealth brings a certain change. Upon meeting Elder Sima Sung, he didn't even bother with pleasantries and expected the sect leader to come out and greet him, which greatly angered Elder Hein Sang. How dare he disrespect the sect leader of Mount Hua like that? This old man must have a death wish. Still, he took a deep breath, suppressed his anger, and stepped aside to invite everyone in. Just as Elder Sima Sung was basking in the small victory, he had to stop in shock. The interior had been completely renovated, with the halls looking particularly grand and magnificent. Unable to contain his curiosity, he asked Elder Hein Sang about it, not forgetting to add the word thieves, which made Hein Sang bristle with anger. His patience was exhausted, he couldn't hold back anymore. Suddenly, a loud voice echoed, saying something crude like, "What a load of fucking bullshit." The unexpected coarse language left him momentarily stunned, and he looked in the direction of the voice. It was a child staring at him, making the scene even stranger as there were adults behind the child running around as if about to faint. Regaining his composure, he looked at the child again and angrily shouted, "What did you just say?" Chung Myung kept his eyes on him, feigning surprise. He then turned around and encountered his senior brother, Jong, kicking him and scolding him for speaking nonsense and asking for a break after just a little training. Jong, not understanding, knelt, clutching his leg, and protested that he hadn't said anything. Chung Myung ignored him, turned back with a grin, and apologized to the old man for letting that remark slip, expressing his regret. Sensing his master's growing tension, Jin Jumryong stepped forward to calm him down. He turned to Chung Myung and asked his name, learning that this was the very person who had embarrassed Southern Edge back in Shaanxi. He hadn't expected that because of this child, all of Southern Edge's transactions with the 10 great merchant guilds of Shaanxi had fallen into Mount Hua's hands. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. But considering the incident where Chung Myung had spat blood and flown away after taking a hit from Lee Song-baek, his martial skills couldn't be that impressive. Chung Myung used his words to lure him closer, claiming he had a hearing problem. Standing too far away, he couldn't hear clearly. Jin Jumryong, invoking his status as an elder, demanded that Chung Myung come to him as a matter of etiquette. Chung Myung seized this opportunity, praising Jin Jumryong for his correct statement, and then pointed out how the earlier demand for the sect leader to come out was also a breach of etiquette. Jin Jumryong was left speechless, as contradicting this would be akin to insulting his own elder. Seeing his disciple at a disadvantage, Elder Sima Sung intervened, advising him to let it go. He said that although the boy was a bit rebellious, it could be forgiven. However, he warned that such rebelliousness could one day cost him his head. With that, he led his group away, including Song-baek. Song-baek paused and bowed to Chung Myung, who returned the gesture, making Song-baek happy as he turned and continued on his way. In the meeting room at that moment, Elder Sima Sung's face showed clear bewilderment as he faced the elders of Mount Hua. Their composure and relaxation were in stark contrast to 2 years ago. Could it be because they now had money? Although these material improvements couldn't compare to those of Southern Edge, he felt very uncomfortable. When asked by the sect leader about the taste of the tea, he offered a compliment. The flavor was rich, but for that very reason, it felt less enjoyable. He explained that the overpowering scent of plum blossoms overshadowed other aromas, clearly implying criticism of Mount Hua for once seeking to dominate the world while rejecting Southern Edge. Finally, they got to the main point. Elder Sima Sung spoke bluntly. This year would be the last Mount Hua and Southern Edge conference as it no longer contributed to Southern Edge's development. If the competition was organized for the relationship between the two sects, it was merely for show. Our relationship has never been good, and currently, don't you all here want to eat me alive? These words were meant to insult, infuriating the elders. However, they couldn't refute what he had just said. After he left, the sect leader finally spoke. No matter how much insult we endure, I can withstand it. But the concern now is for the children. His words mean that this year's martial arts competition will be more dangerous than ever. The pain the children will have to endure is something I cannot accept, he said, expressing the concern of everyone present. Outside, Chung Myung's shouts were heard as he chased his senior brothers like ducks. He knew this was the moment to prove his earlier promise. Everyone was more spirited than ever. In contrast, the welcoming banquet for the Southern Edge sect inside was extremely silent. While the disciples were enjoying the feast, senior brother Jin Jumryong was very uncomfortable seeing the lavishness. He still believed Manhwa was all show and no substance, but the more he thought about it, the angrier he became. What he wanted was a comprehensive victory in both wealth and prestige. Jin Jumryong stood up angrily and said loudly, "Our generation must make the Southern Edge sect the #1 in the world. So this leisurely attitude of coming here as if on a tour makes me angry. Everyone must maintain their resolve and not forget our purpose for coming here." As soon as he finished speaking, there was applause from Elder Sima Sung. He praised his disciples' words as correct but noted a few missing points. The martial arts competition is about comparing skills, and not injuring the opponent is a basic rule. But seeing the aggressive spirits of the Manhwa disciples, this needs to be reconsidered. Hearing these words, Jin Jumryong was a bit surprised but quickly understood his elder's implication, smiling sinisterly. He understood that this time they were free to break their opponent's limbs, especially that insolent brat. Elder Sima Sung was even more determined to eliminate the boy sooner, thinking about him growing up to lead Manhwa. As night fell, senior brother Yoon Jong slowly stepped outside and immediately saw Joel Gun standing in the yard. In the end, he was too nervous to sleep. Meanwhile, that junior was lying with his limbs sprawled out and snoring loudly. Tomorrow would be the start of the conference. As the two were lamenting, a voice called from behind. Myung, half awake, walked over and asked, and the two senior brothers admitted they were nervous and afraid they wouldn't perform well tomorrow. Chung Myung immediately interrupted, asserting that only those who are unprepared feel nervous. Now, if given 10 more days, could the senior brothers do anything more? Reflecting on this, they remembered the relentless, non-stop training sessions. Chung Myung clarified that they were not nervous but lacked confidence in themselves. Even if they were weak, they had done their best. So, he told them to go to sleep and maintain their health for tomorrow, while he went to train a bit. They were very surprised since tomorrow was the Manhwa and Southern Edge Conference, but for Chung Myung, it was just a minor matter compared to daily training. Senior brother Yoon Jong then realized that no matter what, the junior would still maintain his usual demeanor. All our complaining has been as foolish as the actions of those idiots. In the forest, Chung Myung was observing very carefully, and the thought of Uicial made him shiver. Any sound made Chung Myung alert, and he blamed himself. However, he truly sensed two very distinct auras on the other side. Smelling something fishy, Chung Myung grinned sinisterly, preparing to investigate. As he approached, he saw two handsome men like statues, Baek Chun and Jin Jumryong. They were brothers, but their relationship was strained. The wretched eldest, Jin Jumryong, had caused Baek Chun a childhood of immense suffering. Thus, Baek Chun decided to come to Manhwa, determined to become stronger and seek revenge. However, after a period of training, Baek Chun gradually realized his true purpose. This sect needed him to lead it to become a place unrivaled by any other faction. Hearing these words, Jin Jumryong revealed his true malicious nature. Jin Jumryong despised the weak and would never accept that Manhwa could reclaim its former glory. After today, both you and Manhwa will have no face left in the martial world. As Jin Jumryong walked away, Chung Myung jumped down, laughing loudly at the brothers' tragic story. However, he did praise this junior uncle for choosing to become a disciple of Manhwa. He promised to prove how right it was to choose Manhwa over Southern Edge, and it was time to punch those arrogant faces. Early in the morning, everyone was dressed in martial uniforms, ready for the Manhwa and Southern Edge conference. The sect leader reassured the students that there was no need to be so tense, their faces stiff with anxiety. Winning or losing was not important, as this was just a stepping stone for their future. These words sounded hollow to Chung Myung. They didn't boost the students' morale, but they did relieve much of the burden in their hearts. However, when the Manhwa and Southern Edge conference began, the sect leader was startled and anxious because many dignitaries and merchants from Shaanxi were entering to watch the competition. The sect leader glared at the Southern Edge elder, suspecting this was his scheme to disgrace Manhwa. Outraged, he ordered the gates to be closed and everyone to be expelled. It was perhaps the first time anyone saw the sect leader so angry, but then a voice interrupted. Master Huang stepped forward, admitting the fault was his for not informing the sect leader in advance. He thought that having the Manhwa and Southern Edge conference without any spectators would be less interesting, so he had invited a few people to watch, hoping the sect leader would accept this. At this point, the sect leader could only sigh in exasperation. How could he refuse such a request from a major sponsor? He had no idea that this trouble was caused by his precious Chung Myung. Knowing that having Master Huang draw influential people here would change the situation completely, Chung Myung had set the stage. The Manhwa and Southern Edge conference began with a match between the brothers Baek Chun and Jin Jumryong. The two, resembling each other yet dressed in contrasting black and white, looked like a painting. Ideally, as representatives of each sect, they should have fought last, but being placed first indicated that the outcome of the match would set the tone. Everyone watched intently and nervously. Baek Chun, with the presence of a fierce tiger, immediately charged with astounding speed, executing the fierce tiger Qingyang sword technique with immense force. The powerful aura even reached those below, highlighting the intensity of the match. The intensity of the situation above was immense, with the advantage leaning towards Baek Chun as he continuously pushed his opponent into a corner, thrilling the audience. However, Chung Myung could tell there was an issue. Baek Chun wasn't landing any hits. To determine the victor, one must strike the opponent. Indeed, Baek Chun stopped because he was exhausted. Despite unleashing countless powerful moves at his fastest speed, accumulated during his secluded training, he still couldn't touch his opponent. The gap in their abilities was unexpectedly vast, like facing an insurmountable cliff. Unable to accept this reality, Baek Chun gathered all his energy and charged at Jin Jumryong. Finding it tedious, Jin Jumryong lightly swung his sword, forcing Baek Chun to kneel. Seeing his junior in such a pitiful state, Jin Jumryong wasn't satisfied and struck again, causing Baek Chun to scream in pain. Yet, Baek Chun refused to yield. Gripping his broken sword, Baek Chun tried to stand despite his aching body. However, each time he stood up, Jin Jumryong would mercilessly strike him until his arm tired. Seizing an opportune moment when his opponent was distracted, Baek Chun used all his remaining strength to charge again but still couldn't reach him. Instead, he was critically struck in the chest, sending him flying several meters away. Jin Jumryong mocked that Manhwa's three cat-like techniques couldn't touch Southern Edge. Even after 1,000 years, the result would be the same, so it's best to leave this declining place early. Baek Chun stood up resolutely and responded, "I won't go anywhere. I am a disciple of Manhwa. I will lead this place to become the greatest sect." Jin Jumryong had to acknowledge his junior's steely resolve but declared it was over. He unleashed dozens of attacks, creating screeching sounds that rendered Baek Chun unconscious before he fell. The result of the first match was a victory for Southern Edge. Manhwa's disciples rushed to support Baek Chun, finding him unresponsive and in critical condition. They immediately blamed the despicable Jin Jumryong for being too harsh in a sparring match. Emboldened, he arrogantly retorted, "This is a competition, so it's like this. If I had a real sword, do you know what he would look like now? No one could have known he was so weak. I thought he could at least block some of my strikes. I apologize for overestimating your senior." Angry but unable to refute, they focused on getting their senior to the healer urgently. Below, the merchants began laughing and discussing the interesting match. It confirmed Jin Jumryong's reputation as Shangshi's top talent, emphasizing that investing in Southern Edge should be prioritized. Master Huang, sitting nearby, felt disgusted. These merchants were callous, thinking of money even as someone was dying. Although he was a merchant too, he couldn't understand why he felt such contempt for their indifference. Looking at Chung Myung, Master Huang wondered why he was asked to gather these people. He hoped he hadn't overestimated this young Taoist. Senior Yoon Jong, deeply worried about Baek Chun's condition, couldn't tolerate Chung Myung's indifference and scolded him for being heartless as if his heart were made of iron. Chung Myung calmly reassured his senior to stay composed, stating that their uncle had lost from the start. Hearing this, Yoon Jong glanced at the stage, where the second match was unfolding, feeling extremely uneasy. Before, he hadn't expected Manhwa to win, but at least hoped they could maintain some dignity. He never imagined the 9 schools' top sect would be so imposing. Suddenly, Chung Myung interrupted his train of thought. If all it took was effort, then who in this world wouldn't be a master? The important thing isn't just whether one makes an effort, but how they make it. From now on, senior brother, pay close attention, because all second-generation disciples will lose, he said to Yoon Jong, who was incredulous and asked for confirmation. No one can win. Yoon Jong lamented the previous results, where they had 8 draws and 2 losses. So are we going to lose so miserably now? Hearing this, Chung Myung widened his eyes in surprise and asked, "Who said we're going to lose? I only said the second-generation disciples will lose. So what if those Southern Edge guys come here boasting? Can they just return victorious? Senior brother, warm up because it looks like we'll have to fight a spectacular battle." At the same time, in the arena, another disciple of Manhwa was defeated in combat. He glanced at Chung Myung with disdain, and Chung Myung calmly returned a gaze as piercing as a bullet, as if to challenge him. Another disciple fell, and Elder Hein Sung seemed unable to bear it any longer, having lost 9 matches in a row. He turned to Master Yoon, tremblingly suggesting they stop this. Master Yoon closed his eyes in resignation, refusing because it was too late now, and they had to find a way to stop it. It seemed as if they were conceding defeat by halting the matches like this, just as if they were publicly declaring Manhwa's complete failure. The master's face was extremely pained, trying to endure as if being stabbed 1,000 times. Meanwhile, in the arena, another disciple of Manhwa fell, witnessing yet another victory. The elder of Southern Edge smiled, congratulating his disciples, secretly elated at the 10 consecutive wins, a scenario he had long desired. Turning to the Merchants Guild, he saw they were completely inclined toward Southern Edge. The referee said, "The third-generation disciples will have a team match. Please come forward," he announced. The atmosphere on Manhwa's side became even more solemn after enduring 10 consecutive losses. It was unbearable. Only now did Jong realize that Southern Edge hadn't even used all their strength to fight. He nervously looked at Chung Myung, who, oh no, was terrifying, grinding his teeth fiercely. After each defeat, he noticed that Chung Myung's face would redden slightly, but now it was blooming like a fully blossomed flower. Knowing something was wrong, he quickly advised Chung Myung to calm down. The referee was about to announce the rules but had to stop when he heard the commotion below. "Hold on, absolutely do not release that little guy," he commanded. "Since he was designated for the final match, please don't interfere." Before finishing his sentence, Chung Myung jumped up, pushing the senior brothers aside, and rushed toward the arena like a bullet. After catching his breath, he stood up proudly, loudly declaring, "Whoever, come up here. Anyone will do, just come up here. Before I kill all of you, see how arrogant that little guy is." Jin Jumryong, excited by the disdainful expression on the kid's face, called out Wu Riang. Although the plan was slightly different than expected, meeting this little guy early was good, so let him know his place. Wu Riang obeyed, gripping his wooden sword and charging into the arena. He introduced himself and promised to shut that dog's mouth. Before he could finish speaking, he had to stop because Chung Myung disappeared. In the blink of an eye, he appeared right in front of him with a cold, surging murderous aura. Immediately, he delivered a straight punch to his snout, creating a terrifyingly loud sound that startled everyone. "With so much martial arts prowess, yet you dare to put on airs? Go to hell." Wu Riang spun around in midair before crashing to the ground in front of the startled elder Sima Sung. No one could believe that the kid had disappeared right before their eyes, not even the head elder of Southern Edge. Chung Myung, still ablaze with anger, stepped forward, only to be protested by several disciples of Southern Edge for dirty play and sneak attacks. Chung Myung sneered, probably in response to them. "Are we supposed to shake hands and have a few drinks before going to the battlefield and fighting?" As for that Wu Riang guy, he quickly stood up unexpectedly, showing resilience. However, his body was trembling, and now that Chung Myung took a closer look, he noticed the swelling on his cheek and the blood flowing from his nose. Indeed, in just a moment, blood poured out of his nose like a waterfall, with a rainbow appearing quite dazzlingly. Witnessing this tragic scene eased Chung Myung's anger a bit. If he kept fighting like this, that little guy might die. He then turned to the referee, urging him to call the medic quickly, as otherwise, the kid might lose too much blood and die. It seemed even the referee was perplexed by this unforeseen situation. About to ask the opinion of the head elder, a tearing sound was heard. Wu Riang had completely regained consciousness and stuffed a cloth into his nose to stop the bleeding. He was extremely angry and about to rush forward when he heard a call. It was his senior brother advising him not to be agitated but also not to underestimate the opponent. Facing the stern face of his senior, he hesitated for a moment before realizing it was a tactical move from the opponent. He then aimed his sword at Chung Myung with tremendous vigor. Immediately, a clash sounded. It was a while before Wu Riang felt the horrifying pain from the wound in his abdomen still not ceasing. Chung Myung quickly turned around and continuously struck Wu Riang with his wooden sword before he fell. Finally, it ended with a kick right in the middle of his two balls, sending him flying as if reaching for the stars before crashing back into the arena. Chung Myung slowly approached where Wu Riang lay curled up, trembling. He firmly grasped two pieces of cloth from Wu Riang's body and forcefully pulled them out, causing a stream of nosebleeds to flow incessantly. A mystical rainbow appeared before the eyes of the Southern Edge disciples, who looked on in horror, speechless. Chung Myung glanced down at them once again before turning his back and walking away amidst Jin Jumryong's frustration. As someone who knew nothing about martial arts, yet even the heads and everyone else couldn't help but gape at the overwhelming and swift victory of Chung Myung as if it were a dream. They still couldn't believe it. He turned to the head elder to ask again but saw everyone's faces were incredibly shocked. Even the senior brothers, including the head elder himself, couldn't believe this absurdity, just muttering that they should have lost. How could they have won? It took a while for everyone to accept the truth and realize the martial prowess of that kid, which even the master couldn't comprehend. The head elder knew that this victory not only regained some dignity for Manhwa but perhaps marked the beginning of a talent capable of bearing the responsibility for the next 100 years. Huang, the Grand Master, began to hear praises from the merchants for Chung Myung and Manhwa. Early on, he knew that this young martial artist was not someone who would lose. Perhaps he had predicted the entire situation early on and was gradually proving it to everyone now. Perhaps none of them realized that Chung Myung was a big fish, and no one could catch this fish except him. However, winning just one match wasn't enough. If the disciples lost all subsequent matches, everything would end with the superiority of that kid alone. Huang, the Grand Master, acknowledged that, but still had unwavering trust in the arrangement of the young martial artist. At this moment, Chung Myung was breathing the air with an extremely relaxed expression, as if he had just enjoyed a sumptuous feast. His two senior brothers, Jong and Jong, were speechless, seeing how all signs of anger on Chung Myung's face had disappeared completely within minutes. Only now did the senior brothers return to praise Chung Myung for doing very well. "We should have given him a few more kicks," they said. "Thanks to him, we feel much relieved." Just when the tension was high, Chung Myung interrupted and urged his senior brothers to quickly step into the arena. That wicked kid still hadn't given him a word of encouragement. But no matter what, there was no time to lose. Jong gripped his wooden sword tightly and slowly ascended, noticing everyone looking at him with immense expectation. If he couldn't meet those expectations and lost here, the pressure was immense, making Jong feel choked up until Chung Myung called for his senior brothers to stop. "If you lose, it's death for you," Chung Myung threatened. It was just the usual terrifying threat, but for some reason, Jong felt overflowing with energy now. He regained his courage, stepped firmly onto the arena, and boldly shouted, "As a third-generation disciple of the Hwa-Sen sect, I request permission to spar." On Jin Jumryong's side, still furious about the previous match, now had this Jong guy, daring to request a duel before him, which he couldn't bear, and promptly called Gong Jin to the fight. "Kill that arrogant brat for me as soon as he steps onto the arena," Gong Jin declared, pointing his sword menacingly at Jong. It had been 2 years, but Jong still couldn't forget the gruesome image of his utter defeat in front of a master swordsman. Manhwa had always suffered the most humiliating defeats in the martial arts competitions with Southern Edge back then. Everyone realized that training was futile. He had despaired to the point of accepting that no matter how hard he tried, victory was impossible. And then, abruptly, Chung Myung fell from the sky before everyone. Thanks to that kid, everyone had come back to life after half a year of being dead, and they truly trained without knowing if the gap in strength between the two sides had narrowed, but Jong was determined not to lose easily. On the other side, Gong Jin smirked, promising not to leave any face for Jong, unlike last time. "Today, I'll show you what pain is, bone deep," he sneered. As Jong was about to respond, he was blamed for saying too much. Then, gripping his wooden sword tightly, he rushed forward. At this moment, Jong realized that Gong Jin's posture was the same as before. His sword path was unpredictable yet extremely fast and accurate, making it impossible for him to defend against even one move. But now, things were different. Jong gripped his wooden sword tightly, calmly choosing the right moment before swinging it up to block Gong Jin's powerful sword strike, causing a loud collision. Gong Jin was somewhat surprised that the defeated guy could block his attack. This time, he was determined to strike even faster and stronger, making it very difficult for Jong to resist. He keenly felt that Gong Jin's strength had doubled compared to last time, but it was strange. Why did he see everything like this? Not only that, but he could also push his opponent back far away. Seeing the opponent's panicked expression, he realized something and then looked down at his hand, calming himself that he couldn't suddenly become too strong. Gong Jin yelled, "Don't think you're anything. You just got lucky to block a few moves. Arrogant fool." He then exerted all his strength to rush forward, but this time Jong spun around and kicked him away. Fortunately, the kick wasn't too strong, so he immediately stood up, but couldn't help feeling bewildered. On the other side, Jong was equally bewildered, mixed with a bit of fear, not understanding what that kid had been up to lately. Causing such a significant change, regardless of the opponent, seemed to have lost all reason and rushed forward frantically. This time, he was determined to seriously test what he had learned. This was the downward slash he had practiced like crazy for months. All transformations and techniques originated from his fingertips. Thanks to his firm posture like a mountain, Gong Jin's sword was rushing toward him, and it began to change and transform unpredictably. But under Jong's focused gaze, it seemed to slow down. When the decisive moment came, he had to be determined not to hesitate, even for a moment. His eyes became bright. Determined not to hesitate, he immediately lowered his sword, splitting the air towards his opponent. At the precise moment when the two sword paths intersected, Gong Jin was startled. He hastily turned his sword to defend himself against Yoon Jong's attack. Still on the correct trajectory, straight into Gong Jin's shoulder, it caused an extremely terrifying sound. Gong Jin's wooden sword was broken in half, spinning into the sky before falling. The sound of the sword blade touching the ground, already silent, became even quieter. Everyone on both sides could only gape in astonishment as if they had just seen a ghost. Gong Jin was no exception, but unlike everyone else, he then fell backward unconscious. From the moment Yoon Jong lowered his sword, he knew this outcome, so he adjusted his posture to express gratitude to his opponent for the instruction. And also thanks to those who have been watching the video until now. Why not subscribe to the channel? See you in the next episode. Peace.